Good morning. The Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation will come to order. Today we will discuss NASA's progress, its challenges, and the path forward on the first comprehensive NASA authorization bill since 2017. When I was chairman of this committee's Space Subcommittee, Senator Bill Nelson and I worked together on several pieces of space legislation that were signed into law by both Presidents Obama and President Trump. Continuing that bipartisan tradition, this past March, my colleagues and I together introduced a short-term NASA authorization bill. All of these efforts reveal an important truth, which is this: there exists a strong bipartisan consensus in Congress for backing the critical mission of NASA. When it comes to the final frontier, we're not Republicans or Democrats. Rather, we are Americans first. And all of us know that for our nation to continue doing incredible things in space, we must rely on and empower NASA's ingenuity and determination. NASA has always been one of America's greatest engines of innovation. From Apollo to Artemis, from the Space Shuttle to the International Space Station, our space program reflects the very best of American leadership. I look forward to continuing that tradition by working and enacting into law a longer-term reauthorization of NASA with my colleagues. This is a pivotal moment for our nation's space program. America must maintain leadership in low Earth orbit, while also embarking on a new era of exploration with Artemis. Make no mistake, we are in a new space race with China. And if we fail, there will be a bad moon on the rise. China has made no secrets of its goals. It is investing heavily in space capabilities, maintaining a permanent presence in low Earth orbit, and working to plant its flag on the moon by 2030. The stakes could not be higher. Space is no longer reserved simply for peaceful exploration. It is today a strategic frontier with direct consequences for national security, economic growth, and technological leadership. If our adversaries achieve dominant space capabilities, it would pose a profound risk to America. This is not just about exploration. The choices we make today will determine whether the United States leads in space or cedes space to an authoritarian regime. That is why continuity in NASA's programs is not simply good practice. It is a matter of national security. Any drastic changes in NASA's architecture at this stage threaten United States leadership in space. Delays or disruptions only serve our competitors' interests. Congress has spoken clearly on this matter. In the One Big Beautiful Bill, which I was proud to champion, we reaffirmed strong support for NASA's exploration programs. At a time when some have sought to prematurely dismantle the International Space Station, despite China's presence in low Earth orbit, Congress provided ample funding to continue the safe operations of the ISS, as well as to provide an on-ramp for follow-on commercial stations. And Congress also provided the funds necessary to sustain a presence on the moon. Artemis 4 will deliver and assemble the first major elements of the Gateway Station in lunar orbit, and Artemis 5 will expand surface exploration using that platform. These missions rely on the Space Launch System and Orion capsule to reach the moon and to reach the Gateway Station. It would be folly to cut short these missions after much of the hardware has already been purchased and in some cases delivered and with no commercial alternative readily available. I look forward to working hand in hand with the administration to ensure that those funds are utilized in full accordance with congressional intent. We have seen overwhelming support for maintaining these programs from senators, Republicans, and Democrats alike. Congress supports NASA's exploration goals, and we do not want sudden or disruptive changes that undermine America's leadership. NASA is more than just a symbol of national pride. It is a strategic capability that advances our economy, security, and values. The milestones ahead: maintaining continuous human presence in low Earth orbit, returning American astronauts to the moon, landing the first female astronaut in history on the surface of the moon. As the father of daughters, that is particularly near and dear to my heart, and preparing for human missions to Mars. These are not just scientific achievements. They are fundamental to America's role in as the world's leading spacefaring nation. America must remain the world's leader in space. With steady leadership and clear direction, I'm confident that we will. I now turn to Ranking Member Cantwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm glad to join you today in this fight to say we must maintain our focus on returning to the moon. It's good to see the witnesses here, Mr. Cutler, Mr. Gold, Mr. Bridenstine, and Lieutenant General Shaw, but also want to recognize Bill Nye, also a Northwest Planetary Society individual who is here today as well. I look forward to all your testimony. Today, we're here in a race with China to return to the moon and stay there. Beating China back to the moon isn't just about bragging rights, and it's certainly not just about grabbing headlines. But today, it's clear that President Xi, President Putin, and Prime Minister Modi are all in China having a big national security and strategic discussion that could easily include space and defense and security and defense implications. No surprise, actually, that Kim Jong-un is also there. Let's just take for a consideration that he would like to figure out how to improve his rocket technology with more accuracy, more distance, more tracking. I don't like the scenario. The strategic value of maintaining our position to live and work in space is critical. It's critical to our future economic and national security. Returning to the moon requires us to push the limits of technology to find the solutions that we can solve and maintain our national defense and innovation economy. All you have to do is look back to the 1960s and look at the development of technologies that created an ecosystem within the United States of America that led to discoveries and innovations that we're still now counting on today. So we must not waver in this important mission of technology and national security defense. I believe each of the witnesses will tell us something about this today and why the consequences of failing to achieve this goal will be monumental. We know we need to go back to the moon, and we know we need to do there before China establishes a permanent presence. I want to hear, importantly, about the expertise these individuals think that we must pull together so that we won't fall short of this goal. It's clear in some of your testimony, you're already articulating the strategic advantage China has of being so uniform on their government structure. We, on the other hand, are trying to work both within the government and within the commercial sector on a partnership that allows all of us to creatively work together and move forward. That is why, Lieutenant General Shaw, I found your statement in your testimony quite compelling. Quote, "I believe if we do not unify and synchronize our efforts, we will find ourselves, rather than the space leaders we are today, instead in a position of increasing disadvantage in space as we progress further into this century," end quote. I don't want to see that reality either.
Thank you for the invitation to testify today and for your consistent bipartisan support of NASA. That support has been critical to advancing our mission to return American astronauts to the moon and building a sustained presence there. The most recent example of this support is the funding of NASA in the Budget Reconciliation Bill that supports facilities and activities from Earth to Mars, including funds for the Artemis 4 and Artemis 5 missions. Artemis is more than a space program. It is a statement of American leadership to the rest of the world. It ensures that the United States, not our competitors or adversaries, sets the rules for lunar exploration and resource utilization. Without a successful Artemis program, we risk ceding the moon to China, a nation working diligently to land before we return and looking to establish control over key lunar regions and resources. Their intent is clear, their progress is real, and time is not on our side. This is a race that the United States cannot afford to lose. China's capabilities in space cannot be underestimated. Whether in their activities orbiting Earth or its ambitious lunar program, China's persistence in achieving its national goals in space underscores its unfaltering intent to be the leader in space. Recent progress by China includes a successful static fire test of the Long March 10 rocket, as well as successful early lunar lander tests to determine its capabilities. The United States still retains advantages with the Space Launch System, Orion, Gateway development, and exploration ground systems processing, but appears to trail China for the critical final leg in space to the moon's surface, the development of a lander. Let me be very clear. The country that lands astronauts on the moon next shapes the rules of engagement in space for decades to come. The current Artemis program is making strong progress, but we need every element to execute its role. The technical challenges that need to be overcome to land on the lunar surface cannot be ignored, and Congress must keep a watchful eye on how that effort progresses if we are to win. Artemis 2 is preparing for its crewed launch next year, but the work does not stop there. There is mission hardware being built today from Artemis 3 through Artemis 9. Factories are running, hardware is being manufactured, and thousands of Americans across the country are at work to make this campaign successful. Additionally, the United States is leading a growing coalition of 56 partner nations under the Artemis Accords, a global community initiated under President Trump's first term, focused on supporting a set of principles for peaceful, sustainable, and cooperative space exploration. The rewards of advancing our lunar program extend beyond beating China. Artemis is an economic engine here at home. For every dollar invested in Artemis, $3 flow back into our economy, supporting advanced manufacturing, creating high-quality jobs, and driving innovation that benefits Americans in their daily lives. Supporting Artemis to beat China creates stronger communities, a stronger industrial base, and a stronger America. This race is not just about the moon. It is about economic growth, global competitiveness, and national security. Congress can strengthen our national capabilities with a robust NASA authorization bill to reaffirm our commitment to the current plan and make improvements where necessary. It should continue the direction for lunar exploration found in the President's Space Policy Directive 1, which calls for the United States to lead the return of humans to the moon for long-term exploration and utilization, followed by human missions to Mars. A multi-year authorization bill with these elements will provide the long-term certainty needed to keep NASA focused and our workforce, our partners, and our allies aligned. Great strides are being made from lessons learned after the Artemis 1 mission, and even greater efficiencies and cost reductions could be realized by cutting unnecessary requirements that are not safety critical, requiring a plan for a phased approach to commercial services for future Artemis missions to further drive down costs, and ensuring that decision-making at NASA centers and industry sites is available when the work is happening, increasing efficiency. These steps will make Artemis more agile, more sustainable, while keeping the United States on track. But passing a bill on its own will not be sufficient. Congress must hold NASA accountable for implementing the laws Congress enacts. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, the progress we have made is invaluable. The investments you have supported are paying off. The industrial base is ready and capable, and the Artemis generation is being inspired. If we lose momentum now, that progress will not be easily regained. But when successful, Artemis will deliver historic achievements that secure America's leadership for generations. With your continued support, Artemis will secure a place on the moon before China, strengthen our economy here at home, and keep America strong. Thank you for your time, your attention, and for your commitment to Artemis, NASA, and America's leadership in space.
Thank you. Mr. Gold, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Cruz, Ranking Member Cantwell, and distinguished members of this committee. I'm grateful to all of you, as well as your intrepid staff, for the opportunity to testify. But I'm even more grateful for the work this committee has done to support American leadership in space via the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Also, I would be remiss if I didn't thank Senator Cruz in particular for your leadership. Senator Cruz and I both share a strong affinity for Star Trek, and the highest compliment I can pay the chairman is that he is the Captain Kirk of the Senate. Thank you, Senator.
Your time is extended to 10 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I think that could be a new nickname in the Senate here.
Well said, Mr. Spock.
Well, with your leadership, we'll live long and prosper. And I'm so grateful that while others sat down, Senator Cruz, Senator Cantwell, and all of you have chosen to stand up and to fight for this nation's future in space. Specifically, per the direction of the One Big Beautiful Bill, NASA must complete and launch the Lunar Gateway. Just last month, along with NASA officials and representatives from all of our international partners, I watched the successful deployment test of Redwire's massive rollout solar arrays for the Gateway's power and propulsion element. These arrays, which will be some of the largest ever deployed by humanity in space, will power the Gateway, representing the pinnacle of solar electric propulsion technology, a key capability for both future civil space exploration and national security activities. Without the funding and direction of the One Big Beautiful Bill, this critical work would be in jeopardy. And I'm sure China would like nothing more than for the U.S. to abandon its lead in solar electric propulsion and to lose the benefits of Gateway in orbit and on the lunar surface. With Gateway and full commercial logistics services, the Artemis program can support lunar surface operations for 60 to 90 days, enabling robust activities and transforming the dream of lunar resource extraction and utilization into reality. Without Gateway, lunar surface activities will be limited to 5 to 7 days, dramatically curtailing the very nature of NASA operations. Additionally, while not a military facility, the presence of Gateway in cislunar space will provide a platform that will inherently allow America and its partners to monitor Chinese activities. A permanent spacecraft orbiting the moon will project American influence and power forward, discouraging illicit Chinese operations that may otherwise occur in the shadows. Moreover, Gateway is critical for projecting American power not only in space, but here on Earth. Over 60% of the Gateway's costs are being borne by our international partners, representing billions that have already been spent building hardware. Turning away from Gateway now would squander this unprecedented global investment in Artemis and force our international allies to seek partnerships with America's geopolitical rivals. Conversely, if NASA reaffirms its commitment to Gateway, we can unlock billions of dollars of additional international investments, creating even more robust capabilities for Artemis, along with a windfall for the American taxpayer. The combined Gateway, PPE, and Halo modules can be completed and launched in 2027, a mere 2 years from now. We can achieve an early win in this competition if America can simply demonstrate the wherewithal not to give up on the race when we are so close to the finish line. Additionally, the success of our lunar and Martian exploration efforts depend upon maintaining a strong foundation in low Earth orbit. The technologies, experience, and partnerships that occur in LEO drives the capabilities of our entire space enterprise. For example, at Redwire, using our biofabrication facility on the International Space Station, we have printed the first ever human meniscus in space. Who doesn't need a meniscus? We follow this up with printing live cardiovascular tissue and bringing it back, still live. Eventually, we could print whole organs in space, and that would save countless lives. We're also at Redwire making even more progress in drug development with our pillbox system that has now flown 32 times on the International Space Station. We've demonstrated how larger and more uniform seed crystals can be grown in space, leading to the development of enhanced pharmaceuticals with better efficacy, longevity, and fewer side effects. There is no question in my mind that microgravity manufacturing will transform the pharmaceutical and biotech fields. The only question is, will those benefits be enjoyed in China or here in the United States? Without the funding of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act and explicit action by NASA within the next few months, we run the risk of reducing the number of American astronauts on the ISS from 4 to 3 and then down to 2. If this committee's directives are not followed, for the first time in history, there will be more Chinese astronauts in space than Americans. This should be unacceptable. Unacceptable to Congress, unacceptable to NASA, and unacceptable to this nation. Again, I'm grateful to this committee for the support of Artemis, the ISS, and NASA science. Together, we must speak out with one unified voice that we will not cede LEO, our international partnerships, and the moon to the tender mercies of the Chinese Communist Party. I urge us, all of us here today and listening online, to fight. Fight for the ISS, fight for Artemis, and fight for America's future in space.
After hearing Mike Gold's testimony, I want to comment on a few things in my 5 minutes. Number one, everything he said about medicine and microgravity is correct. We are seeing transformational capabilities in pharmaceuticals because atoms and molecules organize differently in microgravity than they do here on Earth. There are drugs that we are demonstrating on the International Space Station that we can create that can do things like, we had a drug, a Merck drug, Keytruda, which is for lung cancer, and we were able to make that drug so that instead of trying to find out if within 2 or 3 months if it's going to be efficacious, you can find out within 2 to 3 weeks whether or not it's going to be efficacious. Instead of administering it with an infusion, which takes time and is painful and is costly, you can do it with a pill. These are and that's just one drug that is improved. We're talking about drugs to treat diseases that have never been treatable before. To piggyback on what Mike Gold just said, we are either going to have that capability in the United States because we have a permanent human presence in space with a fully mission-capable space station, or we're going to cede that to China. It is really that simple. Now, that's just on the pharmaceutical side. Then we also talk about regenerative medicine, where we're actually 3D printing tissue. Mike mentioned the meniscus, where we're growing in 3D tissue like cardiovascular tissue and vein tissue and other things. This type of regenerative medicine is critical to the future economy of the United States of America. And if we want to not have a fully mission-capable system, if we want to not have a permanent human presence in space, then not only does that capability go to China, but all of our international partners go to China as well because they want that capability. This is a big deal. So that's on the low Earth orbit side of things. And Senator Cruz, I know you're getting a lot of accolades today, but it is absolutely true. The One Big Beautiful Bill with the $10 billion additional dollars for NASA human spaceflight was in large part you're doing, and I know it was bipartisan. I know the One Big Beautiful Bill might not have been bipartisan, but that element was in fact bipartisan, and I know senators on both sides of the aisle are grateful for your leadership on that. So very important. I would also say the purpose of this hearing is, are we going to be able to get to the moon first? I mean, that's the title of the hearing. And I will tell you, and I know there's going to be questions, and I'll go into more depth later, but look at the architecture that we have developed to land American astronauts on the moon. Look at the architecture. It is extraordinarily complex. In some cases, it hinges on me saying here today that it is highly unlikely that we will land on the moon before China. And I'm going to explain it in the next 2 minutes. So, number one, we have the SLS rocket, which is the most powerful rocket ever built. And Senator Cruz mentioned, yes, it has had its problems in the past. It has been expensive. It had overruns, all those things. But it's behind us. It's done. We need to use it. We have the Orion crew capsule, which, quite frankly, is a shiny object in this whole thing. The Orion crew capsule is not only usable today, but ultimately the cost is going down because more and more of it is reusable every time we use the Orion crew capsule. Those two elements are in good shape. I will tell you, I have been critical of both in the past, in front of this committee and other places, and I'm more than happy to be critical of all of our contractors, just to be really clear. But I will say what we don't have today. Here's what we don't have today. We don't have a landing system for the moon. And there was a moment in time when we had no NASA administrator. It was after I was gone and before Senator Nelson became the NASA administrator, and architecture was selected. And I don't know how this happens, but the biggest decision in the history of NASA, at least since I've been paying attention, the biggest decision happened in the absence of a NASA administrator. And that decision was, instead of buying a moon lander, we're going to buy a big rocket. And I want to be clear, we need this rocket to be successful. It's important for the country and it's transformational. But in the meantime, the architecture is as such. We need to launch Starship. That first Starship is a fueling depot that's in orbit around the Earth. Then we need to launch, nobody really knows, but it could be up to dozens of additional Starships to refuel the first Starship. So imagine launching Starship over and 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 over, dozens of times, no delays, no explosions, to refuel the first Starship. Then once it's fully refueled, then that Starship has to fuel another Starship that is in fact human-rated, which that process hasn't even started yet. By the way, that whole in-space refueling thing has never been tested either. We're talking about cryogenic liquid oxygen, cryogenic liquid methane being transferred in space, never been done before, and we're gonna do it dozens of times, and then we're gonna have a human-rated Starship that is refueled that goes all the way to the moon. Now, when it goes to the moon, we don't know how long it can be there because it's boiling off the entire time it's in orbit around the moon. We don't know how long it can be there, but while it's there, we have to launch the SLS, we have to launch the Orion, the European Service Module, we have to have astronauts and crew all ready to go. And they have to orbit the moon themselves in that window when Starship is around the moon, and then they have to dock around the moon. They have to transfer from the Orion into the Starship. It has to go down and land. When it's on the surface of the moon, Starship is gone, or Orion is gone for the next 7 days until it comes back around in near rectilinear halo orbit. So our astronauts are right now planning to be on the surface of the moon for a period of 7 days without any way home. This is an architecture that no NASA administrator that I'm aware of would have selected had they had the choice. But it was a decision that was made in the absence of a NASA administrator in the last administration. It's a problem, it needs to be solved, and that puts us as a nation at risk of not being the first on the moon. I should say the first next on the moon, because we did land in 1969 to 1972. And Chairman Cruz, I would like to compliment you. I've heard that you have said that we need to put it into law, that The Wrath of Khan is in fact the greatest Star Trek movie in history. And we are in agreement with that. So with that, I yield back the time that I took from the General.
It was the honor and time of my life to serve our great nation and lead our phenomenal warfighters for 33 years in uniform in our United States Air Force and United States Space Force. Throughout my military service, I also had the privilege to work closely with NASA, NOAA, and other governmental civil organizations across many endeavors. But I'm also grateful to have had the opportunity the last 2 years since my departure from uniformed service to work with and in the commercial side of our nation's space business. It's given me a fresh and broader perspective on how to both envision and realize our nation's future in space in totality, and how to bring to bear our combined national strengths to best thwart China in the years to come in this crucial arena. My bottom line up front for the committee today is that I am an advocate for and a champion of a unified grand space strategy for our nation, for the Earth-Moon system and beyond. Yet such a grand strategy, which would unify and synergize our national efforts across civil, commercial, and national security activities in pursuit of common goals, opportunities, and capabilities, does not currently exist. And I believe our mission to return Americans to the moon can be a powerful and a central driver, as well as a beneficiary of such a strategy. During my military career, I watched and studied, as any good soldier would of a potential adversary, as China slowly but surely developed and deployed its own civilian and military space capabilities and set its own agenda for space achievements. It is clear to me that the Chinese Communist Party is already employing its own integrated grand strategy for the Earth-Moon system, with only superficial distinction between civil, commercial, and national security activities, and all focused on a common purpose. And as the senator has already made my next point, I think if we don't unify and synchronize efforts, we may find ourselves, rather than a leadership position, in a position of increasing disadvantage as we get further into this century. Human progression in any domain both has and will involve a robust mixture of exploration, economic opportunities and growth, and security activities to set conditions for success. Space is no different. And by the way, I realize I'm probably representing of those three things, exploration and commercial and economic growth and national security. I'm representing the national security end here, but I also want to say I am passionate and excited about all three of those things. And that's how we're going to succeed as a nation. A notional example for a grand space strategy, objective, would be to set the conditions, standards, and proper incentives for the establishment of an orbital and lunar logistics infrastructure, one that would enable increased capabilities and performance for space activities of all kinds throughout the Earth-Moon system. Such an infrastructure would include on-orbit manufacturing, assembly, refueling, replenishment, and other forms of servicing. We already know that we will need such an infrastructure to sustain human presence on the moon, solely from just the exploration approach. But such an infrastructure could also and will benefit dynamic space operations for national security platforms as well as for commercial endeavors. Yet our national approach to space logistics to date has appeared disjointed and inconsistent to those in the commercial community, and I hope my panelists maybe address this and see their perspective, is seen as inconsistent to those who might want to invest in those capabilities. The Chinese are already matching and perhaps even outpacing us in this logistics pursuit. Here's a recent example. Just in the last few weeks, this summer, as observed by open sources and reported in media, we have seen China perform a docking and apparent refueling operation between its SJ-21 and SJ-25 platforms in geosynchronous orbit. Following that fuel transfer activity, the docked spacecraft together, this was just last month, performed the largest single maneuver in geosynchronous orbit ever yet conducted, likely in excess of 330 meters per second. That's a lot, actually. Well, at least by today's standards. Someday that will be a pittance, but today that's a lot. Other examples of area where I believe we can move faster and more effectively under a unified strategy include cislunar space domain awareness and a cislunar communications architecture, both, again, necessary for sustained human presence on the moon. I'm also supportive of swiftly developing nuclear fusion power solutions in space, which are compelling to sustain operations on the lunar surface, but could also better enable national security activities, such as in the form of nuclear propulsion, and could unlock new commercial opportunities and benefits as well. I will point out that China is developing or has already fielded capabilities in each of these example areas: cislunar domain awareness, cislunar communications, and space nuclear power. The challenges are great, the matter is urgent, but I'm optimistic we can indeed, via a unified grand strategy for space, thwart China's ambitions and continue the United States' leadership in this ultimate high ground. In the words of a different Star Trek captain, let's engage and make it so. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you to each of you. Mr. Bridenstine, let's start with China, a topic you addressed at some considerable length. China is on an aggressive timeline to put astronauts on the lunar surface by 2030, and they appear on track to do so. They're also currently operating a space station right now in low Earth orbit. Mr. Bridenstine, China is racing to control the moon and low Earth orbit, and they're not shy about using space to expand their power on Earth. If America doesn't beat them, if we cede the lunar surface or continuous presence in orbit to Beijing, what does that mean for our national security, our economy, and America's leadership?
Very important question. So here's how I view things, and I think the general will appreciate this from my time as a lieutenant in the Navy. We did joint professional military education, and we learned this thing called the DIME theory of national power. And in each of those elements, you have, it's an acronym, DIME: diplomatic, information, military, economic power. When I was at the helm of NASA, my goal was to always think about what we're doing in those elements. How does this advance diplomatic power? How does it advance information power, military power, and economic power? On the diplomatic side, you mentioned the International Space Station and the next generation commercial space stations. On the diplomatic side, we have like 15 different countries that are operating the International Space Station today. We've had astronauts from, I think, 21 different countries at this point. We've had agreements with actively, I think we've got over 600 or 700 agreements now internationally as it relates to missions. NASA is a key element of diplomatic power for this country. I will tell you, I don't think it's often used correctly. I mean, we could put it on the table for a whole host of, kind of carrot and stick kind of activities to benefit the United States of America and an America First policy. That's the way I thought about it when I was the NASA administrator. On the information power side of things, one of my big things that one of my first eye-opening experiences at NASA, when we landed InSight on Mars. This was a lander that was going to land on Mars and help us understand Mars quakes. Like, how is it organized inside? Well, when we landed InSight on Mars, it was on the cover of every newspaper worldwide. That's amazing information power, including one newspaper was the hardline newspaper of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in Iran. Now, I'm not saying we want to win their press, but at the end of the day, it was a story about how we landed on Mars.
But their Sunday comics are excellent.
But it was a story about how we landed on Mars, and it was a story about how we did it, when we did it, what we were doing, and it had a list at the end. The last was all of our international partners that participated with us in that. This is a newspaper in Iran where they don't get good information about the United States of America, but when we land on Mars, it changes things. It changes the perception of young people towards this country that we love. And I think that's an important power, information power. Of course, everybody likes to talk, Apollo 11 when we landed on the moon and the whole world watched. I mean, that's information power that we reference even today. If we can land on the moon, why can't we do these things? That kind of thing. On the military side, NASA is not strong. We don't play military. We don't report to the Secretary of Defense. But a lot of our technologies and capabilities, in fact, have dual use capability. One thing that concerns me greatly right now is the devastating consequences happening to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory out in California, JPL. They're the ones that build all the Mars landers. They're the ones that have landed on Mars 9 times in history. But a lot of that technology, make no mistake, has military application, and we're at risk of losing a lot of that. So I think that's important to note as well. Finally, that's the military side of things, but it's really not where NASA plays. NASA plays in exploration, science, discovery. The E, and this goes back to the opening statements, the E is economic power. When it comes to pharmaceuticals, regenerative medicines, advanced materials, article came out, China is using their space station to create new advanced materials for hypersonics, materials that my understanding is we don't have right now, although maybe somebody knows something I don't know. At the end of the day, we have to use microgravity, where we know atoms and molecules organize differently. We have to use it to our advantage, and advanced materials, China is doing that. And we're not doing it the way we should, and we're at risk of losing it. So all of those elements, I think, are important. When we think about the great power competition with China, we need to think about NASA being used for diplomatic power, information power, military power, and economic power.
Thank you. Gateway will be America's eye in the sky in cislunar space, extending our lunar surface program by enabling longer missions, heavy equipment delivery, and protection of U.S. assets, while paving the way for advanced infrastructure like Interim Administrator Duffy's goal of a lunar nuclear reactor by 2030. Meanwhile, China has made it clear that it intends to build its own cislunar station as a platform to dominate the moon and to pursue critical resources such as helium-3. Mr. Gold, in your judgment, why is it critical that the United States lead with Gateway and cislunar before China builds its own cislunar station and uses it to control the moon?
Thank you, Senator. When I was at NASA, I got a briefing on our ability, or should I say inability, to monitor Chinese activities in cislunar space. I didn't sleep for a week. You hear democracy dies in darkness. Our freedom could die in the depths of space if we are not able to monitor and understand what's happening with space situational awareness around the moon. And relative to nuclear on the moon, you mentioned helium-3, it's not just about the moon, it's about Earth. The countries and companies that control the moon will control the Earth. It's just a matter of time. Rare earth elements, helium-3. We need to be able to extract these resources. We need to be able to learn to live off the land. I'm a native of the great state of Montana, did a lot of camping and fishing back in the day. I can't imagine going on those camping trips if I had to bring all of my air, all of my water, all of my food, all of my oxygen. You can't have a sustainable, robust presence or support economic activities if you can't live off the land. And we can't do that without nuclear. And I cannot praise Secretary Duffy enough for acknowledging that this isn't about just going back to the moon. This is about going back to the moon, harnessing its resources for the Earth, and establishing infrastructure and a permanent presence. The Secretary gets that, and I applaud him for moving forward with nuclear. And by the way, breaking news, our friend Amit is now the Associate Administrator of NASA. And again, I very much appreciate Secretary Duffy's decisive action, his decisive leadership, in elevating the head of the Moon Mars program to Associate Administrator, the highest civil servant post at NASA. That sends an important message, not just to NASA, but to our international partners and even to China, that we're back. We are reigniting the torch of Artemis, and we're going to go forward to the moon. I can tell you the NASA civil servants needed to hear that. And again, I'm very grateful to Secretary Duffy for making that point. At Redwire, we're developing a system called Mason that's going to use microwaves to sinter regolith, to create landing pads, berms, roads. We need to be able to build that infrastructure. But more than anything, we need to be able to rebuild our credibility here on Earth. When I was negotiating the gateway agreements with the European Space Agency, and thank you for that privilege, Jim, they learned one thing about popular culture, maybe from the comics and the Tehran Times there, Lucy and the football. They told me, Lucy and the football, why should we sign up with you? Trump administration will be gone in a year and a half. We would look foolish for making that investment. And I told them, you know what, you're right. Don't listen to me. They're justifiably skeptical. NASA has failed to sustain a beyond LEO human spaceflight program since Apollo. Failure hasn't just been an option, it's been a certainty. So how did I convince the Europeans? Senator Cantwell, I had your help. And I told them, don't listen to me. Listen to Senator Cantwell. Listen to Senator Nelson. Listen to the bipartisan coalition that Jim Bridenstine created. Because if we lose, then they will carry forward. And if we cannot show that we can be a good partner, that we can be a reliable partner, all the benefits that we talked about, diplomatically, economically, will go to others. We're talking a lot about Star Trek. The reason I love Star Trek, not just the adventure, not just the stories, but because it said we're not going to have just better technology, but a better future in space. We launch not just our astronauts and hardware, we launch our values. And if we can't move forward with Gateway, if we can't move forward with Artemis, we will lose that future to the Chinese.
偷偷告诉大家，我最近发现了新法宝 Royal Face 逆时奇迹系列，它有活肤露、全效精华，还有精华霜。尤其我皮肤比较偏干，所以我非常的注重保湿。保湿做得好，肌肤自然烹饪。提亮肤色更年轻，抚平皱纹超有感，而且气色变好。用心保养，每天都更美一点。美吧。